Okay, good morning, everyone. I am Jennifer Slattery with the League of Cities and Towns, Director of Training and Membership, and we're happy today to have Kim Moores here with us from RIHEBC, and she's going to talk to us about financing some building projects that I'm sure we all have going. I do want to draw your attention, and I'll put it in the chat. I do want to draw your attention to a resource that just came out from the National League of Cities on all the different funding available in Rhode Island based on infrastructure. So I'll put that in the chat, but right now I'll turn it over to Kim. Thanks for being here, Kim.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Hopefully everyone can hear and see me okay. I'm going to share my screen in a minute, but I just wanted to introduce myself, and I do see several names that I recognize. So hello to those of you I know, and hopefully I'll meet the rest of you sometime soon. I am Executive Director of RIHEBC, as Jen said. RIHEBC stands for Rhode Island Health and Educational Building Corporation. And I've been in this role for 4.5 years now. Previous to that, I've always on the public finance side of things as a financial advisor and investment banker, and actually worked at RIHEBC's sister agency in Massachusetts called Mass Development. So with that, I will go ahead and share my slides. And I encourage you, hopefully I'll be able to pay attention to the, if you raise your hand or have a question, you can go ahead and put it in the chat or raise your hand. And Jen, if I'm not seeing it, just go ahead and
Sure, I can
interrupt me. Yeah. Again, our acronym is RIHEBC. That's too much to say, so we like to say RIHEBC, and that stands for Rhode Island Health and Educational Building Corporation. Our mission is to provide, funding programs for mission critical capital projects, eligible institutions, and that really runs the gamut here in Rhode Island. That's all of you for school construction projects. And now actually legislation has changed. We can do financings for cities and towns for any kind of project. It has to be a capital project. And then we're also do financing programs for the state's private educational institutions. That's K through 12 and higher education, and cultural organizations, museums, performing arts centers, the healthcare sector, that's obviously hospitals and health clinics, community health centers, those kinds of things. Our funding programs, I won't go into too much detail, but tax exempt or taxable bond issues, so securities, and those can be issued in the public markets, or sometimes they are privately placed directly with banks as investors. We have grants and direct loan program that I'm anxious to tell you all about. So we'll get to that in a moment. But, through our mission, our vision is to better the lives of Rhode Island residents by facilitating access to, good quality facilities for mental, physical, educational, and cultural programs, and all of those kinds of institutions that can finance through RIHEBC. Again, for capital needs, that's construction, renovations, equipment purchases, capital equipment, that kind of thing. So as Jen and I were talking about, you see Bob the Builder there. I guess he's a little outdated in this little icon, but this is how my kids grew up, with the Bob the Builder that you see here. And so many of our projects that we finance are construction projects. So I thought I'd stick in Bob the Builder there. Moving on to just a quick summary. So we've been around since 1966. It's a long time. Again, I've only been here for 4.5 of those years. So we are the prominent issuer of tax exempt bonds in the state, and have developed extensive knowledge and expertise in providing tax exempt and taxable bonds, as well as other kinds of financing. As I said, my background goes back about 25 years, if not more, all in public finance. So I'm very knowledgeable of investment banking, of tax exempt bonds, of structuring bonds, those kinds of things. But we also call upon some very knowledgeable and expert financing partners or business partners, law firms, investment banks, financial advisors, that kind of thing. So since our founding, RIHEBC has provided approximately 10.2 billion in financing to our borrowers. As of fiscal year 2022, our bond portfolio is 3.3 billion. So that's all of the bonds we have outstanding, total 3.3 billion. And in the last 10 years alone, we've facilitated 4.1 billion in bond financing. That's to 47 institutions, 28 communities, and 4 regional school districts. Now, primarily, we do, our bonds are for construction and renovation projects, but we also quite a few times do refundings, they're called, for the purpose of generating debt service savings so that you can get a little savings on your debt service payments. So if you think about why it's beneficial to issue bonds through RIHEBC, especially on the tax exempt basis, you compare tax exempt rates to, let's say, conventional bank financing, there's a significant spread between taxable and tax exempt rates. And this estimate here, just based on that spread, so about 380 million in interest cost savings to borrowers on debt service during this 10-year period.
Kim, there's one question in the chat from Mayor De Silva in East Providence, just asking if RIHEBC funding would be available for building community centers.
It would, yes. And I'll say again that our legislation was recently changed, our enabling legislation. So prior to the change in that legislation, which was the 2022 legislative session, we would not have been able to do that kind of financing. But we made a push to open up the kinds of projects that we could do for municipalities. So prior to 2022, we were restricted in financing only school construction projects that had been approved by the school building authority. So actually my slide that's coming up in a little bit might be a little outdated. So we might have to correct my slides as I go here. So let's see. So just a quick, some of the deals we've done, and I'm not sure I can see who's on the call, but all of these that are public schools or cities or towns were for public schools, so done prior to that legislative change. So we have not taken advantage of the legislative change for municipalities yet. And we'd love to do a deal for anybody for a non-school project. Again, it has to be a capital project. But you see the private institutions, Roger Williams, Brown, and then we do charter schools, Achievement First in Blackstone Valley, Paul Cuffey School. So these are the kinds of things, kinds of bond issues that we've done. This slide is only bond issues, so we're not showing the grants that we've done. Grants tend to be made on a much smaller scale, so about $100,000 for smaller projects, obviously, and for smaller institutions. We are not running a grants program at the moment because we're trying to launch a new loan program, which I'll get to in just a sec. Any more questions so far, Jen? Oh, I can see. Okay. No.
Let's see, there's one. What benefits does RIHEBC offer compared to going through banks or other traditional financing? And also interested in hearing about any grants available.
Okay, so I think I just answered the grant program. We did run 2 grant programs in fiscal 21 and 22. And RIHEBC, unfortunately, just isn't like a Rhode Island Foundation, for example, or a Champlain Foundation. We just don't have that level of funding. So when we make grants, we make them from our reserves. And if we keep making grants every year, then we won't have any more reserves and we won't be able to do grants. So we decided to do a more sustainable type of program and hopefully a small loan program that will be beneficial to the types of institutions that would normally apply for a grant. And so in terms of financing programs, when you issue bonds through RIHEBC, you're getting the benefit of tax exempt interest rates. And so I'll go into that in a little bit on this slide. Yeah. So our programs are bond financing, tax exempt and taxable bonds. And those are typically bonds that are for longer term financings of larger capital projects, construction, renovations, capital improvements, equipment, when we can do refinancings. And here's where the public school bonds that we've issued in the past have been eligible to issue through RIHEBC because they get approved by the school building authority and are eligible for housing aid. So that's the state aid that subsidizes debt service. Again, the 2022 legislative session changed it so that we can now do any kind of financing for municipalities. I will say, as a side note, you may choose to go through RIHEBC, or you may choose to just issue bonds on your own, because cities and towns have that ability. So we together would need to make an assessment of whether or not it makes economic sense to go through RIHEBC versus just issuing bonds on your own for a non-school project. And then just quickly before I get to the tax exempt interest rates, equipment loans, we have equipment loans for shorter term financings, I say 10 years and less, where the bonds are for really more than 10 years, up to 30 years, maybe even longer. And this is typically for capital equipment, maybe a fleet of vehicles, police cars, buses, office equipment, those kinds of things, and even energy savings projects. So those kinds of projects would fall into this category. This is a faster program. There's just one approval, where bonds require 2 approvals, and we have standardized documents. So it's a little bit less expensive to issue through it, to do an equipment loan. So just getting to tax exempt interest rates and why those are beneficial versus a conventional bank loan. So an investor purchases a tax exempt bonds specifically so that the interest they earn on the bonds is exempt from federal and often state taxes. And so therefore they can offer lower interest rates to the borrower because they're not paying the federal and state taxes on the interest. So then that translates into lower cost of borrowing for you, the borrower, versus going through a conventional, mortgage type financing or commercial type financing at a bank. So does that make sense? Does that clarify, or is that clear? Or does anybody have any follow-up questions on that? All right. So then, in addition to, again, bond and equipment loans, we do direct loans, and we've done them in the past. We're sort of relaunching or rebranding it this time around and calling it the Health and Education Loan Program, broadly defined. Health and education meaning mental health, physical health, education meaning, cultural organizations, public schools, private schools. So we're trying to capture everybody that is RIHEBC eligible. These loans will be made from RIHEBC's own reserves. And again, we're doing loans instead of grants because we need to have it be revolving. We need to have money going out, but then money coming back in, so that we can make it a sustainable program, rather than giving all our money away and then giving our money away and not existing anymore, I guess it might be that. So these loans are specifically intended to support organizations who face challenges obtaining traditional financing from banks and credit unions. So we'll go and see the specifics of that. So eligibility is Rhode Island not-for-profit institutions and cities, towns, and school districts. Now, we've limited the size of the organization here. And again, that's because we're trying to help out organizations who don't normally have easy access to loans and financing. So 10 million or less in operating revenues is probably not applicable to many of you. But my hope is that if you have organizations in your municipalities or that of, you can direct them to this program if they're seeking your help for a project, and you can't help. Maybe you can turn them over to RIHEBC. So but you are eligible as long as you meet these these are criteria designated by the board. So in existence for at least 3 years and operating revenues of 10 million or less. And that's not-for-profit cities, towns, and school districts. The again, the kinds of not-for-profits run the gamut. Mental and physical health care providers, educational institutions, and that includes child daycare centers, cultural organizations, museums, performing arts, YMCA's, Boys and Girls Club. Hopefully you get the picture. But along the lines of small loan, we were looking again to target or replace the grant program, and our loans will be, these loans will be 25,000 to 250,000 with terms of 3, 5, or 7 or 10 years. So the interest rate on these loans will be beneficial in terms of, well, they should be below market rate and should be beneficial compared to what would normally be offered by a bank. But I think what again I'm saying is banks might not even lend to these kinds of organizations, and those are the kinds we want to be helping here. So the rates are going to be competitive, standardized documents, and fast and easy approval on loan funding, prepayable at any time, and yours truly excellent customer service. So so these loans, the other financing programs are more likely to be applicable to all of you, but I'm hoping to make you know, influencers across the state aware of HELP, this loan program, so that in case it does come across your desk that someone is looking for your assistance and you can't, or maybe in addition to helping, you can direct them to this program, and we can serve as one of the funding sources for whatever project they might be doing. So that's the HELP program. Again, bonds and equipment loans are RIHEBC's mainstay or staple. And this last slide is just a little pitch for social media. So that's really all I had to say. I don't know if anybody has any more questions.
Peter Schaefer, you always have a question. You're on mute, Peter.
All right, now I'm not.
Hi, Peter.
Hi, Kim. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. So you remember, and you had it on your screen, the deal we did just about a year ago.
Yeah.
And you know, the interest rate on that was around 2.4%. And you know, the dynamics have changed, and we had approval by our voters of a very large issue to replace our 2 high schools. And we're going through the, and I think we did some good projections on long-term cost. But the thing that's changed dramatically, even just over the last 2 or 3 months, is short-term interest rates. And the state does not reimburse band interest on by statute.
Right.
And or if you do a deal to finance the whole project, they only reimburse the interest rate after project completion.
Yes, that's right.
So we've got a situation here, and the other places, and I talked to Mayor De Silva's finance director about this, and he's got the same concerns recently. We've got carrying charges, construction cost loans. I think in the city of Warwick, we could be talking $9 million a year for 2 or 3 years before we get any reimbursement. So it's really in a situation where we're right at the edge of whether these projects can work any longer because of the change in short-term interest rates. Long-term interest rates, we had a pretty good projection on that. As a matter of fact, long-term hasn't changed much in the last 6 months, 9 months even. But the short end, and if you're not getting reimbursed on that short end, I don't know how these deals work. So you know, I'd like to do something communication with the governor's office, the legislative delegation, the Department of Education, because just the environment has changed so much in 1 year that what worked a year ago doesn't work any longer. And that's all I have to say.
So not a question, but a concern, and wondering if, as you go through the school building authority process, if you've mentioned it to them.
we've been doing communication with staff there. So, but it's really, this concern has increased every month since the end of September, because every time the Federal Reserve goes up 25 basis points or 50 basis points, and it's been frequent. I mean, we're talking even tax exempt carrying charge of like 3% for 2 or 3 years, instead of, I think East Providence, part of their financing, short-term financing was under 1%. You know, so there's been a big change here, and I don't have an answer.
Well, I think
other than a change in the reimbursement laws.
Right, the statute. If you go through the process of having your project vetted and approved by the school building authority, and it seems to me that it's a reasonable request to be reimbursed for the, get your housing aid from the get-go, because they have such, strong oversight of the approval of your project. Why not just make the reimbursement available to you immediately? So I hear you. I can voice the concern, certainly can, and see if there's anything RIHEBC can do to
Well,
assist.
that would be helpful, because obviously you want to do business, and we're really in a situation where it may not be possible to do business.
Right.
The Federal Reserve is saying, we don't want you to build new schools. Really, that's what's happening. Well, they don't want to reduce economic activity to control inflation. And what's happened then is it's become extremely difficult to do major projects, especially with a long construction time frame under the current legislative scenario, reimbursement scenario.
All right, we'll see what we can do.
Kim, there's another question in the chat, just asking if you can speak about arbitrage reporting requirements.
Oh, my favorite topic of all time. It's just one of those bugaboos about issuing tax exempt bonds. So I'm not sure what the specific question is, but is it, may I ask who's asking? Is it somebody who has RIHEBC bonds outstanding?
I was trying to unmute. It's me, Denise from Tiverton.
Hi.
And how are you? You've helped me out on this before. If the money is all spent, why do we have to do this year after year after year?
Well, yeah, so we should talk offline, I think, Denise,
Okay.
Because there is not a requirement that you do it every year.
Or every 5.
Okay. Well, if you have, if you continue to have bond proceeds held with the trustee, then the arbitrage rebate reports must be done. But let's talk offline. And
Okay, great.
we'll see if we can figure this out.
Thanks.
But you're Tiverton, right? You said?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll shoot you an email.
Okay, sounds good. Just so everyone's aware, though, when you issue tax exempt bonds, there are several sort of tasks that you just need to be mindful of. Arbitrage rebate is one of them. So essentially the federal government is saying, yeah, okay, we're going to make you have the benefit of tax exemption on your bonds, get a low interest rate. You can't then take bond proceeds and arbitrage them. You can't invest them at a rate that's higher than the rate you're paying on your bonds. It hasn't been a thing for a very long time. You just simply, because of market conditions, there's been no ability to arbitrage. Even if there was the will or the desire to arbitrage, it would be nearly impossible, because there are restrictions in your bond documents that say you can only invest in certain very safe kinds of investments, and those kinds of investments will never yield more than the yield on your bonds. But it's nevertheless, it's a requirement that you prove that you haven't arbitraged your bonds. So it's one of the things you know, it's taking the good with the bad, I guess. It's kind of one of those pain in the neck things about issuing tax exempt bonds, but it has to be done. So Denise, we'll see if we can get you straightened out.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Anything
Any
else?
questions, folks? Kim, do you want to, I don't know if you have a slide with your email on it or if you wanted to
Oh, yeah,
pop that into the chat, but I think that might be helpful just as we.
sure. Let me stop sharing and then I'll demonstrate my complete lack of.
Actually, if you want to tell me, I can pop it into the chat.
I think I got it. All right.
Okay.
KMOOERS at RIHEBC. And boom. There it is.
Perfect.
I'll send you the slides. I don't know if anybody wants them, but I'll send you that PowerPoint presentation, and if people want them, they can take them down. But anybody call or email anytime if you have questions on your outstanding bonds, on our new program, on anything. I'm very willing to take phone calls and respond to emails. So please do if you have questions after this.
Great. All right. Well, seeing no other questions, I will say thank you to you, Kim, for
Thank you.
joining us today and offering up some great information for our communities. And look forward to seeing you folks on the next workshop Wednesday.
Oh,
Next
yeah,
week.
just say we'll be at the convention, so look for our booth.
Yes, the convention, March 23rd.
Yeah, we'll be there.
sign up on our website for anybody who's interested in going to the convention.
Come say hi.
Yes, go say hi to Kim. All right,
Well,
thanks so
thank
much.
you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yep, take care now.
All right, bye, everybody.
Bye, folks.